Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of Claibs Online. And we're going to talk some hockey today because hockey season is here. And I couldn't think of a better person than Jeremy Rutherford of the Athletic. He covers the St. Louis Blues as well as the National Hockey League. First of all, Jeremy, it's back with time to go. It's time to get it going.
Yeah, Mike, and the Blues are the last team in the league out of the 32 to play. Finally gets underway Saturday. We were watching hockey in Europe the other day, and now we're watching hockey all this week in North America. Finally, the Blues are getting underway at Enterprise on Saturday.
What was the reason on why they started so late?
I asked a few people, and nobody knows. Even within the organization, there wasn't anything obviously planned at Enterprise Center or any reason scheduling-wise, but this is just the cards they got dealt.
All right, we'll deal with it then. All right, let's talk a little bit about this hockey team. Just what do we have with the St. Louis Blues of 2022-23?
Yeah, I think what we have is a team that doesn't look as good on paper as last season, but still has the potential, I think, to be one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the Western Conference. Obviously, depending on health, that's a situation with everybody. But the reason they're not as good, I don't think, on paper is because you lose David Perron. He's a 20-plus goal scorer, in just about every season. And also Billy Husso. Last year, you had a struggle by Jordan Binnington. Billy Husso steps up and plays really well. But I think you could counter those arguments by saying the power play units still look pretty lethal. You got 2 balanced units. And also you got Jordan Binnington, who, he came out and told me in a story recently that he kind of lost that chip on his shoulder after winning a cup, becoming an all-star, getting a big contract. He lost that chip, and so he had to look for a different type of motivation. He's looking to hit the reset button this year, and if he plays like he's capable of, then perhaps you do have that top 4 or 5 team in the West.
Well, with that said, how good are these guys going to be, and who's going to replace Husso and Perron with regard to productivity and obviously in the dressing room?
Well, when you talk about replacing David Perron, that's first of all difficult in the locker room. Craig Berube told me a couple of weeks ago he's the guy who kind of created and led that culture. Now, obviously, you got guys like Ryan O'Reilly and Braden Shen who are terrific, but David Perron is the guy always talking. Every player you talk to in the locker room, they say he just never shuts up, and I think that's kind of what this Blues locker room had in David Perron. Now, on the ice, his 5-on-5 numbers weren't the best on the team. Obviously, they had 9 20-goal scorers last year, but his power play production was terrific. Who's going to step up for that? It looks like it'll be Jordan Kyrou. For a couple of years now, he's put up some decent numbers, and he hasn't gotten the ice time that maybe some people think that he should. We all know the reason why. He's a little bit of a defensive liability, but he's going to probably go from 16 minutes. He could get up to 18, so I think he's going to swallow up some of that ice time. And then goaltending-wise, we touched on Binnington. They bring in Thomas Greiss. I think he can play the position, but he hasn't been great the past couple of years in Detroit. He's certainly not going to push Jordan Binnington for starts. And what happens if Binnington falters? I don't think Thomas Greiss is the guy who can take you on a run.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you're making. So you better have some goalie on speed dial and being able to make a deal if this thing falls apart. All right, can we close the book on the 2019 Stanley Cup team? Because as we look at this team, while the faces may be still there are still a few guys from that team. The style of this hockey team apparently has changed quite a bit. And, we keep living off the memory of 2019. I'm wondering, when are we going to turn that page and start focusing on what we have to offer? We've got a lot of young players on this hockey club to go along with some veterans. So how's that going to work?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Isn't it amazing? And we saw this with other Stanley Cup winners over the years, just how quickly they disassemble. It's tough to keep everybody financially, but teams evolve. But what we've seen in just 3 short years with this St. Louis team is not only are you down to 7 or 8 guys from that Stanley Cup team, but you also have a different style of play. You go back to 2019, Craig Berube, that hard-nosed style where they were going to dump the puck in, chase it, play with some physicality. That was the style. Those big defensemen, those big lanky guys with the Joel Edmondsons, Alex Petrangelos, Jay Bouwmeesters, all those guys. It's a much different looking defense right now. And Mike, you go back to last season, this Blues team became more of a rush team than anything. They were one of the better rush teams in the league. And now when you talk about signing guys like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, who are certainly rush players, to these 8-year deals on top of the year they got, you're talking 9 years of that. That's the style they're going to play. But they're still going to have to be responsible. Craig Berube, even though he can evolve and he can change, he's not going to go for risk-reward all season.
We like to beat on our chest and talk about the 8 20-goal scorers that are on this hockey team. That's all good and well, but they had a hard time scoring in postseason. So how do you fix that? And where are you going to see more goal scoring come from? You mentioned Cairo getting some more minutes. Who else do you see being able to contribute more and be more consistent? I mean, it's nice to have some 20 goal scorers, but you still need a guy, and Tarasenko was that guy last year, a guy who can get you 30, 35, and maybe even 40 goals, because, you know, when clutch times come around, you're going to need a guy who can step out there and turn a game around with one shift.
Yeah, Mike, I go back to a story that I wrote last year with about 3 weeks to go in the regular season. I looked up past history. How many of those 8, 9, 20 goal scoring teams had that type of balanced production in the playoffs? And there weren't many. It was only one team since 2006, the Carolina Hurricanes, that even won the Stanley Cup that had that many 20 goal scores. So it's all about being clutch in the playoffs. You know, we saw some scoring from the Blues last season in the playoffs, but not enough, certainly not to the level that we saw during the regular season. So when you talk about who's going to, you know, boost that production with a guy like David Perron leaving, you know, I mentioned Jordan Kyrou, but also you got to think about some guys who might fall off offensively. Look at Ivan Barbashev, 26 goals. You know, granted, 4 of those were empty netters, but is he going to be able to score at that rate on that third line? You know, you don't know. You look at Jake Neighbors. He's going to be a rookie, 20-year-old rookie. He's starting out on this third line with Braden Shen and Ivan Barbashev. You know, I think he's got some scoring potential, but maybe not 15, 20 goals in his rookie season. So I think that they're really going to still have to rely on Kyrou and Thomas to, you know, produce at the level that we saw last season, which is asking a lot, you know, consistency from these young guys, but also get it from some of these veterans who, you know, have been up and down at parts of the season, like a Braden Shen, like a Ryan O'Reilly.
I want to go back to Jake Neighbors for a second. You mentioned the fact maybe he couldn't score 15 goals. First round draft choice, guy checks a lot of boxes. I guess my question is, why not? Other than lack of skill to be able to score more goals or lack of ice time.
Yeah, no, and you know, when I throw out that number 15, he's certainly capable of scoring 15, but I just think that, you know, he needs to prove first that he belongs and he's going to stay in the lineup, because you can't score 15 if you're not in the lineup. And Doug Armstrong has already come out and said if he doesn't factor into that top 9, then he's better off playing in Springfield. So, you know, he's in the lineup for now. We're going to have to see what he can do with Braden Shen and Ivan Barbashev. But you're certainly right. First round draft pick, he's got to be able to produce. But the one thing I like about Jake Neighbors, Mike, and you'll appreciate this when you see him every night here, is the details in his game. This isn't just a kid who's going out to, you know, run up and down the rink. Braden Shen told me a couple of days ago, he said he's not all over the place like a lot of these young kids. He's got a lot of structure in his game. He gets to the right places. He puts teammates in good spots. And I think that's what's going to lead to his success. So is it going to be goal scoring? We don't know, but I think he's going to be a productive member of that line.
You know what, when you talk about teams today, you know, the first question I always ask you is who's going to play the body? And heaven forbid if somebody drops the gloves, who's going to assume some of those roles as far as playing the body? Now, we know Barbashev and Shen, those guys have shown that they don't have a problem with that role. But do we have anybody else who can step in and be a little bit more physical? Because there are going to be some nights where you're going to have to play that game.
Yeah, I only need about 3 seconds to answer this question. No, no, they don't. No, I think that there's guys on this team that can finish their checks and play the body that way. You know, are there going to be guys who take umbrage? You know, I was working on a story a couple of days ago about Braden Shen and came across this stat, Mike. You know, Braden Shen, since 2017 when he joined the Blues, he's tied for 53rd in the league in scoring, 53rd, all players since 2017. Only one player in those 53 has more fights than Braden Shen, and that's Matthew Tkachuk. After that, it's Braden Shen with 13. Tkachuk has 15. And so every time there's a situation, whether it be Kadri and Justin Falk, you know, a situation like that, more times than not, it's Braden Shen who's sticking up. Now, you have Bortuzzo too, but he's not going to be on the ice, you know, that much. So, you know, I think this can be a team, even though they're a rush team, that has some guys who are going to finish their checks, like Barbashev, like Neighbors. Neighbors even surprised you with the way he throws the body around a little bit, and Braden Shen, and this fourth line. Let's touch on that, Mike, because Craig Berube came into this camp, and one of the top priorities that he talked about was having an identity on that fourth line. The Blues haven't had it. They've been shuttling guys up and down, no consistency, you know, not getting great performances from some of those guys. You're going to see a line starting out this year, Nathan Walker, undersized, but every time he's on the ice, you seem to notice him. You got Noel Achari, who people are going to remember from Boston in that series against the Bruins. And then right now, you're going to have Josh Levo on the right side on that fourth line, but Alex Toropchenko, he's coming back from that shoulder surgery. Everybody liked what he did last year. And I think if you can get him into the lineup after this rehab that he's been going through, I think you're going to have some sort of identity shaping up on that line.
Tell me who Logan Brown is as a hockey player.
Logan Brown is a guy who definitely needed a change of scenery. It was not working out in Ottawa. He had some injuries too that he termed fluky. I don't have a lot of details on those injuries, but he comes to St. Louis. He gets off to the great start, right, and was playing well and kind of earning a spot. But then it slowed up on him, and then they get to the postseason, and they didn't have a spot for him because they were playing the 11-7, so there wasn't room for him. By all accounts, he had a great summer, and he came into camp, and he was one of the most noticeable players. But now he's got an upper body injury. I believe it to be a shoulder injury. And now you look at that third line, which he could have been centering had he stayed healthy. Now you have a situation where they were forced to put Braden Shen on that third line. Logan's got to get healthy now. I was down in Charleston a couple days ago, and Craig Berube said, we got to get back to St. Louis and get him checked out. So at the moment, he's got to be healthy to show us what he can do. What kind of player is he? I think if he could get into a position to succeed with some good wingers, he could be okay on that third line. Obviously, Braden Shen gives you a better option, but we won't know until we see Logan back on the ice.
Jeremy Rutherford of The Athletic is with us, and we're talking hockey as NHL season is here. The Blues open up on Saturday against the Chicago Blackhawks. So fill in the blank here. When you match up the rest of the league with the St. Louis Blues, how do you fill in the blank here? When you match them up, the St. Louis Blues are really good at what?
They're really good at being a sum of all their parts. And I think that's what we saw last year with the 9 20-goal scorers. You even look at that defense. There's not an all-star in that defense. Maybe Justin Falk. They talked about him potentially for an Olympic spot last year. But I don't think you can look at the forwards, look at the defense, and maybe even the goaltending and say, this is an Olympian, a top-notch Olympian, and this is a guy who's, going to be elected to the All-Star game, slam dunk. I think it's a situation where they got to be a sum of their parts. And when you say they have to do what, I think it's going to have to be play up-tempo, move the puck, get the puck out of their zone, which Doug Armstrong has constructed, I think, a roster that's capable of doing that. Nick Leddy, say what you want to say about the contract, say what you want to say about him being in the top pair. He can skate and he can move the puck. And I think when you have him with Colton Parayko, that makes Parayko better. Still remains to be seen, but there's a chance for that. And then Krug and Falk, same thing. So if the Blues can get the puck up ice, be smooth in transition, and not just do that 1 out of 3 games, do that 2 out of 3 games, do 2.5 out of 3 games, I think they can beat a lot of teams.
All right. In order for the Blues to be a real contender, they have to do what? And what is your biggest concern about this team?
They need to get out of the division with Colorado.
That's true.
I think the competition is going to be tough. Now it drops off in the bottom of the West, right? But a couple of these teams in the West are tough. So I think that this Blues team is just going to have to play to its strengths, like we talked about a minute ago. And to me, the biggest concern right now, admittedly, I've said this, is Jordan Binnington. Just what kind of goaltender is he going to be? Because there's not a Ville Husso behind him. And maybe that's a good thing for Binnington. Maybe it clears his mind. He knows he's the guy. He can go out there and play. He makes a mistake. He knows he's going to be out there the next night. But you need solid goaltending. And I think that we didn't see that from Jordan Binnington last year. Obviously, like I said, he wants to hit the reset. But that's the thing that scares me. Until you see a month or two of Jordan Binnington playing like he did for that small stretch in the playoffs, then I don't think you can say that this Blues team, can play up to its capabilities.
All right, you mentioned Colorado. This is a team you're going to have to beat if you think you can get to the Stanley Cup Finals. What do the Blues have to do, and what are the Blues better at than Colorado right now?
Yeah, well, it's tough because there aren't many teams in the league that can, if you do tail the tape, say that they're better than Colorado in this area. It could be the goaltending if we see that old Jordan Binnington because, they're going through a goalie change and somehow won a cup last year with that guy that they had in net. So that's tough. But you know what? Blues fans can look at that series against Colorado and say that they probably played them tough than anybody that the Avs faced on that run to the Stanley Cup. I thought that they were toe to toe with them for a little bit. And a lot of people, including, I had a short conversation with Patrick Waugh in the offseason for a story that I was working on. And he says he really felt like that if Jordan Bennington doesn't get hurt, they could have beat the Avs. So, what do they need to do? I think it's the same as any team in the league. You got to slow Colorado down, and that comes down to finishing the checks. Look, the Blues can be the rush team all they want to be, but you're not going to keep pace and outrace those guys. So I think in a series like that, like we saw in the playoffs last year, you have to slow them down. You have to finish those checks.
Yeah, you can't let them freewheel out of their own end and build momentum, because once they hit your blue line, it's over.
Yeah, and even though the Blues have defensemen that can skate, it's hard to keep those gaps tight and prevent the Avs from getting in your zone and circling the puck and finding that spot to score. So I think that's one of the biggest issues.
Well, that to me is more of a forward responsibility. I mean,
Yep.
if the blue line's backing up, the defensemen are backing up, they have no chance. Those forwards have to be able to stop them and start them and deny them pucks and just do little things, I think, just to get them off track where they're out of sync is the way I would approach it.
Yeah, 100%. And we saw a little bit of that last year, I think. And that's why a line like that third line is going to be a good one. Barbashev and Shen and Neighbors, those are guys who are responsible defensively, are going to play the body. Hey, we saw what happened last year, Mike. I'm sitting up in that, Ball Arena now, Stan Kroenke calls it. And, you're sitting up there in the press box and you're just watching Nathan McKinnon do circles, for some shifts. And, that just can't happen. That's how they slow you down. They tire you out and they put the puck in the back of the net.
All right, what about the rest of the league? We know about Colorado and Tampa. I'm going to throw Florida in that discussion. Give me three other teams that we should be paying attention to, and then give me three teams that you think might be going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, how about that Florida team? Boy, did they look a lot different than they did last year. They trade Huberdeau and Uyghur to Calgary and pick up Matthew Tkachuk. And what does Matthew do? Our boy Matthew Tkachuk goes down there, and first thing he says is, "I hate Tampa Bay." So he's getting that thing riled up. But no, I like these teams. I like Florida. A team that I like, Mike, in the East is the New York Rangers, and they looked the part last couple nights ago. And I just think between their goaltending, Shesterkin, I think he's a guy who can be a Vezina-type goalie for them. And even though, we gave him a lot of grief for trading Buchnevich for Blais and a cup of Starbucks there, they've got a lot of guys up front that can get the job done. So I like the New York Rangers. Another team I like, I know that we saw them in the playoffs last year and the Blues had their way with them, but I just think that Minnesota thing, Billy Guerin's doing a good job up there. I saw him in the press box the other night. He's making some very tough decisions. They've got some cap situations. I realize they got a 40-year-old goaltender in Fleury. Maybe Evison got outcoached last year by Berube a little bit, but I still like that Kaprizov, and I think that they're still on the rise. In terms of teams that are, probably going in the wrong direction, I know Blues fans will like to hear this. The Blackhawks, that rebuild's going to take forever, right?
Oh, it's brutal.
It's brutal. So they're in for it, as we've seen here in the early going.
When you look at the West, there's a good team that's going to watch the playoffs on TV. When you look at the Kings, Calgary's going to be okay. I know some people back off of Calgary, but I think they're going to be okay. The pressure is really on Edmonton to get something done this year. And then you have some other teams like the Ducks and San Jose who are trying to find their way. And then what do you do with Nashville? I mean, there's a team that I think was a disappointment to some in how their season ended. But, I mean, the West, to me, is the most competitive division in all of sports. When you think about the NBA and their Western Conference and, Major League Baseball, the West has very good teams. They don't really drop off very much, but it's going to be fun to watch them compete, which says to me every game counts. You know how some teams don't turn it on until January. I think if you give away some games in December, boy, you'll be scuffling to try and find 2 points in March.
Yeah, for sure. And at the Athletic the other day, Mike, we had to pick our Western Conference playoff field. And I had a tough time because you like 7 or 8 of those teams. You might have wanted to pluck Calgary out of there when they lost Gaudreau and Tkachuk, but then they bring in Huberdeau and Uyghur. And like I said, they get those guys signed. You give Daryl Sutter a 2-year extension. Obviously, they weren't going to give him a young team, right? They were going to replenish him with some veterans. So I like them. But the team that you mentioned, that I should have included earlier is Edmonton. Connor McDavid is not going to sit back and let this career just evaporate without making a long play in the postseason. And, I think things are starting to come together with them. Everybody likes the coaching up there that they got after they went through a few coaches up in Edmonton. But I just think with McDavid and some of the parts that they brought in, they should, they're going to give you a game every night. It's not going to be kind of that up and down. They're going to lose because of taking the risk with one of the best players in the world. I think that they're starting to kind of settle down and become more of a team.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the team concept is in play. I heard Wayne Gretzky say recently he thought McDavid was going to win the Rocket Richard and also score maybe 80 goals.
Yeah.
And, when you think about it, you say, well, why not? And I've always felt once they took the red line out, I just felt like somebody was going to score 80, 90, maybe 100 goals. And we haven't had anybody that was close to that. But with McDavid's ability, this might be the year, especially with Draisaitl. They've got some balanced scoring now. Their blue line can chip in. Your goaltending there is still a question mark. And if they can get that turned around, who knows where they can go. But I just think this is going to be an exciting season of offense. I think we're going to see a lot of teams have some big goal scorers.
Yeah, for sure. And Draisaitl, you touched on him. He was banged up in the playoffs last year, so he's got an off season to heal. I think he's going to be a lot better than what he saw down the stretch with his situation. But yeah, goaltending always seems to be an issue with the Oilers.
All right, 2 final questions for you. One, any rule changes that we need to be more cognizant of and its impact on the game, and also, predictions. But when you think about the Blues, because this roster we're seeing on opening night is going to be completely different than what we'll see going into April. I can guarantee you that. So where do you see the Blues landing if they can stay healthy? And they're razor thin as far as talent is concerned that can contribute right now. So what do you see them doing? And if they go down with injury, who do they have in their system that's ready to come up and make a legitimate contribution, not burn up 12 minutes a night or just being out on the ice?
Yeah, Mike, with rule changes, nothing major, off the top of my head, nothing during the preseason that everybody was talking about. Years past, you had the cross-checking and, it was almost like the roughing the passer, roughing the quarterback in football there for a little bit where you just touched a guy with your stick and it was a cross-checking penalty. The Blues played 8 preseason games and there wasn't any chatter about anything that was being overcalled or something that they were really focused on. So we'll continue to monitor that. And, you know how it always happens. Something crops up in the season that everybody's fixated on. But not off the top of my head. And then in terms of the Blues, like I touched on earlier, I think that, top 4 or 5 team in the West, I think that if they get that sum of their parts type production, I think they can be a good team. But you bring up a good point. If some guys go down, who are they going to bring up? Who can come in? Up front, if you lose a couple of these top 9 guys, you don't have a lot of guys who can come in and replace them. We saw some guys get cut at the last day of camp, but you're looking at guys like Nikita Alexandrov. He's a Tyler Bozak. He's a third-line defensive-minded guy. You got another guy like Hugh McGing, who's been scoring at the American Hockey League level, but he's undersized, had a decent camp. Some of these guys I think could come up here and play NHL games, but they're not going to keep you in that Western Conference race. Same thing on defense. Because you lost Scandella, and I know he doesn't have, a lot of fans in St. Louis, and Scott Perinovich, you're thin on defense. So you're going to have Calle Rosen as your 7th defenseman, Mike. He's going to come in and be that guy, which isn't a bad situation. But after him, you have a Matt Kessel, raw. You have a Tyler Tucker. These are 2 good prospects, but they're still raw. So I think at that point, Doug Armstrong might have to make some sort of move. And then, of course, if you lose your goaltender, who knows? Because you're looking at a 36-year-old Thomas Greiss as your starter.
Cap-wise, Blues are in a very precarious situation with regard to the cap. So how do they fix that?
Yeah, Doug Armstrong and Ryan Miller, the assistant general manager, who is the capologist, looked like Mary Lou Retton doing some cap gymnastics there, trying to get the team in at the buzzer. But yeah, they had to turn in their roster on Monday. Of course, they put Neighbors and Levo on the minor league team for a day to make it work. They're in long-term injury reserve, Mike, right now, which means they're not operating with a normal $82.5 million cap system. They have Scandella's $3.275. They've got part of Perinovich's money. And so basically what they have right now is about $1.6 million in payroll room that if they wanted to go out and spend it, they could. But of course, when Scandella comes back, when Perinovich comes back, and that's 6 months down the road, if they do come back this season, they would come back onto the roster. The Blues would have to shed that salary. So you're right. Precarious is a very good word on this cap situation.
Hey, why isn't anybody interested in Wayne Simmons?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I thought he did a good job up in Toronto and loved up there too. So I don't know. I just think that, so much wear and tear on the body. I guess if you wanted to point to one thing. He's played that style for a long time. And I got to be honest with you, I didn't watch him every night, so I don't know where his game's at. But I know that the people the past couple of years up in Toronto loved him. But at this point, going on waivers, and well, I think he cleared, right? So you're looking at a situation, AHL or retirement. I don't know what he'd do at that point.
I think that's an interesting guy that people might want to keep an eye on because he's apparently good in the room. He plays a physical game, knows his way around the rink. And I just think that's a guy who'd be a spare part, much like, the Blues have had a couple of guys like that in the past. James Neal was like that last year, and Brower was like that a couple of years ago.
Right.
It's not a bad idea to have a guy like that around.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think he could fit in definitely in the room. Terrific room guy. Do you take up some of Jake Neighbors' ice time if you're trying to get him going, or do you play him on the fourth line instead of a Walker or a Levo? I think there's potential there. Maybe this cap situation factors into a decision like that.
Okay, we'll see. It should be an interesting year. Well, Jeremy, we always thank you for your time, sir. You continue to do an outstanding job with the Athletic and covering the Blues in the National Hockey League, and can't wait to see you because the season is here. Can't wait to read you because the season is here. We thank you for your time today.
Pleasure to be with you, Mike.
He's Jeremy Rutherford. I'm Mike Claiborne. This has been another edition of Claibs Online. We're talking hockey. Don't forget, St. Louis Blues, they're back in action starting on Saturday night, and we'll be there, and we'll look forward to talking to you down the road on ClaibsOnline.com.